The infamous, the legend, the ultimate. The one for the desert island, the one end-of-world camera. Cartier-Bresson's camera of choice that he pushed through those wooden planks on that fateful day in Paris to capture that decisive jumping man trying to avoid the 2-inch rainwater puddle of doom. That's right, my friends. I'm talking about the Fujifilm X100V. Real talk though, guys, I know there's a lot of hype around the Fujifilm X100 series of cameras, and just like you, I wanted to find out for myself what all the fuss was about and whether or not the X100V is really worth the $1,800 Canadian price tag. And so for this review, I actually shot with this camera for 7 days on the street, and I shot for hours each day. And I'll be upfront with you, full disclaimer. Is this a good camera for street photography? Yes. I think this is a great camera for street photography. If you can afford it, then I think you should definitely pick one up. And I do believe that it is worth the hype. I'm going to do this review from a no frills, no BS street photography perspective. I'm not going to talk much about specs. You can Google that. I'm not going to pixel peep or head deep into the woods by myself with just the X100V and a crackling fire to keep me company. The review will be all about what this camera actually feels like when you're shooting on streets, and as well as the results you get out of this little guy once you get back to your bat cave. On the streets, this camera feels right to me. The weight and size feel manageable and comfortable even after your 7th hour of shooting street photography with it. I like to shoot with a wrist strap, and so the majority of the time I'm holding the camera with only my right hand as I look for my next shot. And so I prefer a lighter setup that I can pretty much hand hold all day. The X100V definitely checks that box. The grip on the X100V is virtually non-existent, and I do wish that there was at least a little something more to hold on to. As well, the plastic feeling material around the grip area is not as grippy as the more rubber feeling material in other Fujifilm cameras. Another big factor for me is stealth while I'm shooting. The small size and casual looks of the X100V definitely is less intimidating to most people versus a regular sized mirrorless camera setup. The camera has a sort of classic touristy look to it that most people don't pay much attention to. The flip screen is a huge plus for me, as I often tend to shoot from lower and higher angles, and people generally will pay less attention to you the less you need to bring the camera EVF up to your eyes. I also love how silent the shutter is. I prefer shooting in mechanical shutter mode, and this mechanical shutter is nearly silent. I almost had to double check a couple of times to make sure I was activating the shutter because it's just that quiet. That's a plus for sure. I've been using a Fujifilm camera for a number of years now. The transition to the tactile feel of the dials and the decent menu system and overall user experience has been painless. I don't find myself shooting with the optical viewfinder that much, as I prefer the EVF, but the ability to see outside of the frame of your shot might be a useful feature for some. For me, I grew up mostly digital, and I prefer to see what my final shot will look like as I take it. Luckily, the EVF works well enough. I like that the lens cap uses a felt-like material in order to slide the cap onto the camera, rather than the usual clip-on caps that you might see in most cameras that often fall off the camera by accident. I tend to be very mobile when I'm shooting street, and it's a nice little thing to know that I can toss this camera into my bag and not have to worry about the lens cap popping off by accident. The weather sealing and solid build quality also give me confidence that this camera is rugged enough for real shooting in streets, which can often be pretty unpredictable as the weather changes and random knocks and nicks are inevitable when shooting in a big city, especially depending on your shooting style. So far, the battery seems to hold up as well as most Fujifilm cameras. I can go through 2 of them in a 6 to 7 hour day of shooting street with the rear LCD brightness at max. In terms of performance, the camera is mostly solid. The startup time is consistently fast, which is important to me as I constantly turn my cameras off and on throughout the day on the streets. The autofocus was also consistently fast and accurate, even with near and far fast moving subjects. I usually shoot single shot center point autofocus, and in that regard I was impressed. I did notice that the autofocus system seems to be a step behind the Fuji 23mm f2 prime, but the real world differences seem to be negligible. In terms of the pictures that you get out of this thing, they are superb and some of the best that I've seen from any Fujifilm APS-C camera or any crop sensor camera for that matter. Compared to the performance of the 23mm f2 Fuji Prime, the X100V seems to at least be on par, if not better, in terms of the overall image rendering and quality. Both raw files and beautiful Fujifilm JPEGs are packed with detail and color that is second to none. It's quite impressive that Fujifilm can squeeze this much out of a small setup. The X100V so far for me has proven to be a good balance between image quality, performance, user experience, and size and portability. The 35mm equivalent lens is my runaway favorite focal length for shooting street, and the images that this camera can spit out has been impressive to me. I think that the X100V is Fujifilm's love letter to street photographers, and for the most part they listened and nailed what the majority of us want in a camera while we are out there in the real world shooting for hours on end. There's a lot of romance around this camera, and so far I'd say it's warranted. It's not just a looker, beautifully aesthetically designed, but it also has a performance and quality on the streets to back it up. So here are my overall pros and cons after shooting Fuji X100V on the streets for 7 days. Not that many cons at all, but I will say that the nearly 2G Canadian price tag will be tough to justify for most of us, as you can get similar performing interchangeable lens cameras even within the Fujifilm system for around the same coin. And that's why I say this is a bit of a love letter camera for street photographers. If you love shooting, are in the market for a compact setup and can afford it, then I think the X100V is definitely worth a look. For most of us though, I think this camera falls into the category of an expensive and passionate toy. One of the best of its kind, but the price I would suspect puts it out of reach for the average street photographer. So in the end, does this latest iteration of the legendary Fujifilm X100 line of cameras hold up for real street photography? Yes, I definitely think that it does, but at its current price point, I think that for most of us the camera will end up being more of a status symbol than a practical paintbrush tool that we use to express ourselves and capture the humanity in the streets. So I hope you guys enjoyed my review and perspective, and I hope it helps you with your decision to pick up the X100V or not. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And also, have any of you shot with the X100F or V? Do you think that they're worth the hype? Let me know in the comments below, guys, and I'll catch you guys soon. Easy.